antique cars. So I just kind of wanted to have you share with us some of the guests. But one question that goes through my mind is when you bring these cars out and you have these guests get in the car, especially some of the very rare cars that you actually own, do you kind of like get really, really nervous when they get behind the wheel and they're not really the kind of driver car enthusiast to the extent that you are?
No, not at all. I mean, there are two different shows. There's Jay Leno's Garage on YouTube, which is more the technical aspect of the cars and not so much, the celebrity angle. And there's the Jay Leno's Garage on CNBC, which is kind of like a rolling Tonight Show. You're doing an interview with a guest in a car, and it isn't so much a lot of times about the technical aspects of the automobile. It's about, my dad took me for ice cream every Sunday. The family went in one of these, an old Packard or whatever it might be. But no, I don't get too nervous. And no, not really. During COVID, we weren't allowed to have two people in the same car under the rules. So we always had a second car for the other person to drive, and we talk via, a headset. And that worked out okay, actually. It wasn't too bad. It wasn't too intrusive. So, but no, I don't really get nervous. No, I mean, when you talk with Tim Allen or Jerry Seinfeld or any of these kind of guys, they're real car people. Once in a while, you get somebody who's not really a car person, and then it's just sort of funny,
How do you go about getting some of the guests? I mean, do you kind of like, I know that when you're on your TV show, The Tonight Show.
Well, here's how it works.
Okay.
You call them up and you go, look, I don't care about your cocaine bust. We're not talking about how bad your movie bombed. We're not talking about your divorce. It's strictly cars or motorcycles. That's all it is. And if there's anything else, we edit it out. And they go, oh, sure, okay. Because, what happens is a lot of shows are looking for ratings, or they're looking for some exclusive, we got someone that'll open up about his divorce or whatever, but that's not the case. And most of the people we've had on the show, I know from the Tonight Show, John Hamm and all. John Hamm, a huge car guy. A lot of these people, they know that's what I'm doing. They've seen this show. Other people say, oh yeah, no, Jay's not going to go there. Oh, okay. Because all you have to do is, break the trust once, and then word spreads pretty quickly.
Well, I remember you said to me one time, and it was a good word of advice. I've had a number of people give me advice, say, whenever you interview somebody, make sure you ask a good question. That was Dave Despain. And then Bob Varsha used to say, well, you're basically a color. So that means you have to know enough to ask a sensible question and let the guest take over. And then your best advice you ever gave me is that during my interviews, I'm good about do not ambush interview people. Just keep it straight, stick to the narrative, which is basically what you just said, and that works.
Yeah, and that works. Nobody likes to have somebody jump out of the bushes and, with some stupid question. But I mean, I know from the entertainment angle of it, because it happens to me too. Like, you never answer a question; you always break your silence. I've never been silent my whole life. I'm talking all the time, so I don't know what my silence was. Either that, or when you answer a question, never say you answered the question. They say, Leno lashes out. I didn't lash out, but, that's called clickbait. That, you want to get people to read a story, so they do that kind of stuff. But when it comes to cars and motorcycles, that's one of those common grounds. It's not politics. It's not religion. It's like talking sports. You can debate the advantage of a dual clutch transmission versus a manual transmission, whatever it might be, and it's fun.
Last week, it was last week or the week before last, we had Wayne Carini on, and Wayne and I were kind of jaw-jacking a little bit about the electric car, and he was telling us a story about how he had one and he was a little unsure about it. It was a little unsettling because he was worried about, running out of juice and not being able to, because he's out in the country a little bit. So I made a comment to him. I said, what we should do if everybody's game is, it would be interesting to have, let's say, like a round table, have two guys that are, and I'm not necessarily a big fan of electric cars. I get it, but you are, Wayne and I aren't. And I thought if we could get another person on that would be like in your corner and just have a real civil debate about, the pros and cons about electric cars, because I'm just curious. What I don't like is the fact that they're trying to force it down our throats when there's other alternatives. There's hydrogen, there's the alternative fuels, and some of this other stuff, and nobody talks about that.
But it's not really, that's the American way. I mean, when home recording came out, Beta was better than VHS, but VHS was cheaper to manufacture.
Okay.
So manufacturers flooded America with VHS tapes. They bought up libraries so there's enough movies. Okay, so everybody just went to VHS and tape fell by the wayside. I mean, that's the way it works. You come up with something everybody likes or everybody can agree on, and then you go with it, whether it's the best solution or not. You know, you go to Europe and they don't have 110 volts. They got 220 because that's better. But we started our country on 110 volts. So, okay. So we're 110 volts. I mean, it's, was the gasoline car forced down our throats in 1911 when it replaced horses? I don't know. But the government saw the advantage of it, or people saw the advantage of it. You know, for new technology to succeed, it can't be equal. It's got to be superior. It's the reason the Wankel engine failed. Great motor, lightweight, fast, not a lot of torque, but fun to drive, high revving, extremely smooth. But it did tend to use oil, and it did tend to get 2 to 4 miles per gallon less per mile than gasoline, than an internal combustion engine. So consequently, it hung around for a while, and then eventually it fell off the cliff. And if you go back to 2011, when electric cars, the maximum range was 200 miles, that was, okay. If it had stayed at 200 miles, the electric car, I think, would go the way of the Wankel. But now you have the new Mercedes EQS, 621 miles. You go, wow, 621 miles. You can drive LA to San Francisco, no problem, you know. I find I deal with people in showbiz who know nothing about cars, and they like electric because there's no maintenance. I mean, I've had a Tesla for 7 years. I just got a new one. It never, ever went to the dealer, and it never, ever was serviced other than, you know, a flat tire. That's it. And so you go, oh, that's pretty convenient, you know, and that's what makes it easy to live with, you know. I mean, when I go out to the garage, if I'm driving the Tesla, I've got, quote, a full tank every day because I leave it plugged in overnight. And I have that Tesla Plaid, and that's a range about 390, 400 miles. And that's more than enough on a daily basis because in LA, gasoline is between $5 a gallon and $6.60 a gallon, which is crazy, but that's what it is. I mean, I went past a gas station in Beverly Hills, and they were advertising, they were bragging that it was $6.60 a gallon on the sign. I'm going, really? Okay, so I can fill up for $100 a week with a gas car, or I could run the Tesla and have not only the fastest accelerating vehicle you could buy, bar none. It costs me maybe $20 a week to run, if that. You know, so to me, the advantage of electric, it's sort of like smoking. It's bad for you, and eventually people just stop doing it, and the government gives you incentive to stop doing it. And I mean, I think you're going to have internal combustion for a long, long time. But, you know, you go back 120 years ago, and it was steam, electric, or internal combustion. And each one had a third of the market, and each one was pretty good. The electric car didn't win because I have a 1909 Baker, and that goes 80 miles on a charge, which is impressive. But most people did not have electricity in their homes. So the idea of plugging it in, and the cost charging time took a long time back in those days. So that really didn't work out. And steam, although extremely reliable and torquey and quiet, was just dirty and messy, and you had to get under the car all the time and light it with a match and do all that kind of stuff. So you see why that got replaced by the internal combustion engine, you know. And steam ran everything from 1800 to 1911, then internal combustion from 1911 till now. And I predict, I mean, a kid born today will probably ride in a gasoline car about as often as you ride in a manual shift car now. I mean, most people today have no idea how to drive a stick shift. but they're still around, and you can still get them via Porsche or Corvette. Well, Corvette's gone too, but so I mean, it just sort of takes its toll. You don't have to buy an electric car. But if incentives are good enough, then people do. So I don't know. I wouldn't like to see them ban the gasoline car, but what happens is you just make it inconvenient. The idea that when you get a gasoline, first you bring it in for the 600-mile change, oil change and service. That's what, a few $100s. And then you have every 3,000 miles, 5,000 miles, an oil change. You got to go somewhere, get the oil change, filter, flush it, do all that. With an electric, there's nothing. I mean, you don't do anything, and it's pretty crazy.
What's the life expectancy of the motors? I mean, if there is something, since you're familiar with them, if something is to go bad, what would it be? I mean, are there electronics on board?
Well, I mean, my 1909 Baker Electric, when I got it, I restored the body, fenders, and the interior. The motor needed nothing. I mean, I opened up that motor, took the covers off. It was the most beautiful hand-wound copper you've ever seen. I mean, it looked, brand new because it's not running in fluids or dirt. So maybe clean the commutator a little bit or something, but it sat for 50 years. And I put power to it and boom, and it ran. I mean, electric. I had my Tesla Model S. I had it 7 years, and maybe battery degradation was maybe 5%. Instead of 240 miles on charge, it was 231 or something like that. But that's the most it ever lost. So the battery lasted, the 7 years I had it. I never did anything to it. The motor has never been looked at. There's no fluids to change other than maybe brake fluid. But even brakes last almost life of the car because when you lift off the gas, it decelerates and it works as a brake. So you only really ever use the brakes when you tap the pedal to come to a full stop. So it was pretty amazing. I mean, my 1909 Baker, I've got a very early Tesla engine, a Nikolai Tesla, not Tesla cars, a Nikolai Tesla engine from the late 1800s. And, I plug it in for people once or twice a week when they come to the garage. Again, I've never done anything to it. It runs perfectly. It's quiet. And it makes electricity. So, even Ferdinand Porsche thought the best way to power a car was gasoline because his first car was a hybrid. It was a electric car. If you look at that Porsche from 1901 that they found in the barn, it was electric and pretty advanced. But the trouble with electricity has been the same for the last, till before just recently. Battery life, you just didn't get the range on it. You could go, the same thing. For example, when you see electric motorcycles now, I don't really believe in those because I ride a motorcycle for the day. I don't ride it for an hour. And most electric motorcycles, electricity is like sex. Guys lie about it all the time, I mean, nobody, if you have a Japanese hunger striker driving naked and barefoot, maybe you're going to get 125 miles on the battery. But if you ride an electric motorcycle the way you ride a gas motorcycle, you're probably going to get a range of between 80 or 100 miles or less, opening the throttle and, powering out of corners and all that. So consequently, to me, the electric motorcycle doesn't make any sense because you really have a limited range. With an automobile or a truck, for example, I was in that, Elon Musk has got that electric semi truck. Okay, imagine an 18-wheeler that can haul 80,000 pounds that goes 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. I mean, this was unbelievable. It was like driving the Empire State Building. The whole thing just moved, and it went 500 miles on a charge. And it's not out yet. It's pre-production, but it's the future, and you can look to it. You can go kicking and screaming into it, and believe me, I enjoy living in the past. But to me, I think cars like your Hemi Cuda, your GTO, your Ford, your Mustang from the '60s, they'll be the way you use a recreational vehicle. You drive an electric vehicle during the day, and then on the weekends, you take your Mustang or your Ferrari, whatever, you go up into the hills, you zip around, or you do whatever it is you do, But there's no reason to drive a 426 Hemi Cuda with 2 floor barrels on a bumper-to-bumper, on the 405 freeway in Los Angeles. All you're doing is just polluting and wasting fuel. So why not use your electric car to run errands and do what you have to do, and then use your gas car on the weekends purely for pleasure, I mean, for example, there are more horses in America now than there were during the Civil War, because horses are now pleasurable animals. You use them for pleasure and for fun. Nobody really uses them for work anymore, And it's the same thing, I think, with the diesel and internal combustion. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because whenever I'm out in California, and I'm from Northern California, in the Marin County area, and so I got there to visit, especially during Monterey Collector Car Week. But I see a tremendous amount of classic cars always driving around that they look like they're daily users. In Florida, by contrast, you don't really see it, because we definitely need air here, and it is humid, and it does rain a lot, but people around here tend to use them more, like you said, on a limited basis, more of a show deal. Now, because I'm in the business, and a couple of friends of mine, Chris at Lincoln Land, I mean, he drives old Lincolns. I drive, old sports cars every once in a while, and a Mustang or something. Right. And you're right. I mean, but that's just for buzzing around here locally or something. But if I've got to take a trip, I jump in a 2017, 18 car that I bought at an auction or something like that, drive it for a while, and it's reliable.
Exactly.
And because of the comforts. Yeah.
I mean, I think, for example, it is easier to restore an antique car today than it was 40, 50 years ago. I remember going to car shows as a teenager, and there'd be a Duesenberg or a Packard with 3 truck tires, only one of them was a white wall. And because it was the only tires available, and the guy would win the show because at least he found tires, Now people make tires with 3D printing. You can make almost any part. So I mean, I'm optimistic. It looks good. I mean, obviously the junkyards are all gone, and you can't, I bought a piece of chrome trim for my 57 Buick that probably would have been $15 when I was a kid. It was $1,000 now, because you're just not going to find them anymore.
When you were younger, I think didn't you say, or you were telling us once that you used to work in a garage, and you were kind of like a wrench there for a while in New England? But
yeah, I worked at Wilmington Ford in Wilmington, Massachusetts. We did what we used to call odometer recalibrations. A car mistakenly came in with 90,000 miles. We would do the corrective mileage of 12.5, that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay.
No, I worked there, and then I worked at Foreign Motors in Boston, which was, it sounds funny to call it Foreign Motors, but that's what it was. We had Mercedes, Peugeot, Bentley, Rolls-Royce, Citroën, and a few others. We just sold foreign vehicles. Yeah.
Well, when you were younger then, so on some of the cars you were you kind of the guy that went to, did you go to junkyards back in the day, hunting down parts with some of your friends and buddies? I mean, did you hang out with guys that had other interests in cars besides, let's say?
Oh, yeah, that's what it was. I mean, God, there was a junkyard. Every town had a junkyard, and it's funny how you look at stuff, because when I was a kid, we were all looking for 32 Fords, and you'd find in a junkyard a 59 Cadillac or a 58 Oldsmobile or something. And you go, well, that's just a demolition derby thing. I mean, we used to buy those kind of cars. It's funny how your memory is, because I remember about 15, 20 years ago I was at Pebble Beach, and a friend of mine said, I'm looking at a 59 Cadillac. I said, how much they asking for it? 75. And I went, 7,500? That's crazy. He went, no, 75,000. I go, what? What do you mean 70? Because I remember buying one for $600, and you put 8 guys in it. You go to the drive-in, just crazy. So it's amazing what we all thought cars in the 50s would never be worth anything because you all want a car. But now people look for cars in the 50s or 60s, so it just moves forward. When I was doing the Tonight Show, we had interns, and one college kid said to me, "Hey, Miss Leno, you like classic cars?" "I do too." I said, "Oh." I said, "You have any classic cars?" He goes, "Oh, yeah." I says, "What do you got?" He said, mid-90s Miata. And to me, it just kind of made me laugh. But to him, that was a classic car because it was built before he was born, and it just made me smile.
What's interesting too, and I want to get your take on this. Okay, since we're talking about values there a little bit because you touched on that, and then of course the 404, and that brings me up to the Jay Leno's Garage where you had Donald Osor, and he was talking about the Peugeot 404. And when I was a kid in Europe, my teacher in Vienna, Austria, who was English, had a 404, and I remember those cars very well. But where I'm going with this is that since this whole COVID outbreak, and I don't know what the take of it, but at any rate, have you noticed that the car values have gone like skyrocketed? What's your take on that?
Well, the take is the fact, I have a friend of mine who's a big finance guy, and he said during COVID, Americans saved $1.8 trillion.
Really?
It was money you couldn't travel, weren't going out to restaurants. I mean, so what did people do with the money? They saved it. They put it in the bank. And consequently, you're sitting home. What are you doing? If you're a guy, you're reading car magazines and so on. So, okay, now and then you're thinking, what if I die tomorrow? I'm going to buy that 57 Chevy. I don't care. I've always wanted it. And then you go, and that's what happened. So consequently, the prices all sort of skyrocketed because people thought, screw it. I'm just going to get the thing I've been looking for, like that Corvette or whatever it is, or they want, Mustang. And that's what happened. That's what sent the prices sky high.
Wow. It's funny. And I know you follow Bring a Trailer. And the other thing I noticed that's real interesting on Bring a Trailer is all the low mileage cars are breaking the bank. The average mileage car, they're doing okay. They're still up there. But the low mileage car, like that 86 911 that brought $140,000 and it was 19,000 mile car. What's your take on that?
Well, 19,000 is good mileage. The ones I don't get are the 2005 Ford GT, 18 miles. And I go, well, why would you buy that and not drive? Is your wife a virgin too? I mean, what are you saving? And what are you saving this for? It doesn't make any sense. And to me, I find, in America, there's still this myth that a car is worn out at 60,000 miles or 70,000 miles. I've got a 68 Mercedes 6.3. It's got 326,000 miles on it. I use it all the time, and it's pretty bulletproof. I've got a Lamborghini Countach I've had for 40 years, 38 years. And it's got over 76,000 miles. And it runs, if you run them and you use them for their intended purpose, to me, these guys that let a Ferrari or something sit, okay, so half of your engine is under the oil and the other half is above the oil. Up to about the crank seal, everything below the crank seal is nice and lubricated. Everything above that is dry. And when you fire up a car that hasn't been run in 15 years or 10 years, boy, you're just doing metal on metal. It's like driving at 10,000 miles on that initial startup. I think I'm probably maybe exaggerating a little bit, but I think there's a certain amount of truth to it. I know seals dry out. With the crankshaft, half the seal is in the oil, and the other half is dry. Well, the part that's dry, as soon as you fire it up, it's going to be brittle. It's not going to be soft and pliable like the other part of it because it's been out in the atmosphere. It's not under oil. It's getting air. It's getting moisture. So to me, I never look. Mileage doesn't bother me that much, unless something's just been beaten to death. But for the most part, no, I don't worry about that.
Well, because I have people ask me that all the time. Because every once in a while, I'll buy a Porsche or I'll buy because being a dealer, I just kind of buy some stuff every once in a while, maybe an BMW, a Mustang, and everybody asks, well, what's the mileage? And I said, well, it's interesting, particularly with 911s. Is Porsches is just, and that's the one anomaly with cars. There's something about a 911. I don't know what it is. It's magical, I guess. Everybody wants one. Everybody likes them. They don't break. They're pretty decent cars, particularly the late the 70s cars, the 78 to 89 cars.
But you just answered your own question. You know, for example, like whenever I would watch like Reed in Car and Driver or Road and Track, they do the shootout.
Right.
And it'll always be the Corvette and the Porsches win. The Ferraris and the Lamborghinis, either they don't show up or there's some problem because people don't drive them in their intended manner. You know, a Corvette is meant to be driven hard, and so is a 911. And they want you to drive it hard. They want you to test it to its limits because it's been built to its limits. You know, when you talk to you talk to Ferrari guys, and they brag that their Enzo they bought 28 years ago still only has 1,800 miles. And you talk to a Porsche guy, and he's got 200,000 and bragging about it.
Yeah.
And it's still running. I mean, my 6.3 Mercedes, I love the fact it's got 326,000 miles on. Of course, I've replaced the air suspension and fixed things, but the basic motor is real solid. You just change the oil and you treat it properly. You let it warm up and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And they run fine. It'll last forever. You know, I bought a friend of mine, a guy I went to school with. He and I would always talk cars, you know, and I felt kind of bad because I had all these fancy cars and he had an old Triumph, you know. So I said, I'm going to surprise him. So I bought him a Corvette, a secondhand C5 Corvette. It had 96,000 miles on it. And you know something? I gave it to him a year and a half ago. He drives it every day. It runs fine. It doesn't use oil. It passes smog because the car was maintained and treated well. And he changes the oil regularly and does stuff like that. And that car will go easy 140, 150,000 before it needs anything. And this guy's in his 70s like I am. So he's not driving it hard. He's not tracking the car. He just takes it out and puts his foot in it on a Sunday every now and then and has some fun, drives up to New Hampshire or something like that with it. And I got the car for a song because nobody wants a Corvette with 96,000 miles. But I looked at it. The owner maintained it. It looked clean. It ran clean. It didn't have aftermarket hoses. Everything was done at the dealer. So the car will last a long time.
That's the point, is the car that's been driven, if anything's wrong, because you're driving it and you're relying on it, you have kind of maintained it and fixed all the little things that could go wrong. Where a car that sits, you know, there's no telling what you drive it up. You think you're going to go out for a Sunday drive and something breaks, something quits, something doesn't work. And,
well, that's my favorite thing when I read auctions. And the last line is, may need some minor reconditioning.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, please, shut up. Yeah.
You know, you talk about that Mercedes 6.3. That was an amazing car because I think, like you said, I think 68 was the first year for that and 71 was the last year. But they were rated as the fastest four-door sedan at the time, right?
Yeah, and it was only listed at 250 horsepower, but it had a lot of torque.
Now, that 6.3, that's... Go ahead.
There was a guy named Waxenberger who was sort of the John DeLorean of Mercedes-Benz. You know, Mercedes-Benz in America, they had a 6-cylinder carbureted engine with a 4-speed on the column, and they were competing against Cadillac and Lincoln. You know, and people thought, why would you pay more for fewer cylinders and no electric windows? No. So what Waxenberger did was he took the engine from the 600 Mercedes,
right,
the grosser Mercedes, and he stuck it in the 450, and stuck it in the, the regular 4-door sedan body without telling his bosses. And he would roar past his boss's window with this thing. And the boss goes, what the hell is that? He said, he had drive it. The boss couldn't believe how fast it was. And then he told him, they said, well, let's just build a few of them because nobody's going to buy this. And of course, I think they only built about 6,000, but for them, that was pretty good. And it was sold out. It was a huge hit because finally it was a car. You know, in America, horsepower beats everything. I remember Don Garlick's reviewed it for Hot Rod magazine. He was stunned about how complicated it seemed at the time with, fuel injection and overhead cams and stuff we could only dream about,
Wow. Let's talk a little bit about some of the guests that have been on your show. And we were talking earlier about motorcycles. Didn't you do an interview with Keanu Reeves one time on some of the motorcycles?
Yeah, I like Keanu. Keanu's a great guy. Keanu started his own motorcycle company. Keanu's always been a biker. British bikes. I remember in the 90s, he would come to the Tonight Show on his Norton 850, or was his a 750? I can't remember. But anyway, his Commando. He would drive that. We would always talk cars and motorcycles. And then he started this company called Arch Motorcycles, and they build the whole bike. I mean, it's not using anybody else's engine. It's the engine they designed in-house, and it's a very nice motorcycle.
And who are some of the other guys that you've had on your show that you find really, really interesting, that are kind of in that same league, that same caliber, that kind of are true and what you and I would consider true car or motorcycle connoisseurs that you've interviewed? And
Tim Allen certainly is.
A
real car guy. I mean, Tim grew up in Detroit. He grew up around Woodward Avenue, so he was involved in that whole scene back in the 60s, back in the day. So he knows his cars, especially American Iron. And, he's got a Dodge Demon and all kinds of stuff. He's the real deal. Seinfeld, known, of course, for Porsches. John Hamm is a big car guy. I'm trying to think who else. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger likes this. He likes, I have this tank car, and he goes, Jazz, who have these cars. I want you to tell me the tank car is fantastic. He goes on and on. But he's a car guy. He likes interesting stuff. You'd be surprised. Who I just had on the show was of Hall & Oates, and huge Porsche guy, amateur racer, very successful, and he just had Rod Emery build him a custom 356. It's just beautiful. So there's a lot of car guys out there.
When you add your car collection, now you have the warehouses down by the airport there in Burbank. Do you have a fairly sizable garage at home? Are there certain cars that you keep at home and drive back and forth, or do you just rotate them?
The only thing at home is what I drove home that night.
Oh, really?
I don't. Well, I mean, I have a couple of motorcycles at the house, but no, usually it's my wife's a car, and then whatever I drove home that night, I use.
Okay. So tell us about some of the other stuff you got going on now. And I know you've been really, really busy. So you've got some other projects in the work that are not car related, but they're TV related, game show related. Tell us a little bit about that if you want to share some of that.
I'm doing a game show called You Bet Your Life, which is based on the old Groucho show. And that's on in different times in different markets, usually on Fox affiliates around the country. And that's doing really well. We just got picked up for a second season, so that'll pay for some more oil changes and stuff. So that's good.
Oil changes.
And then, of course, the Jay Leno's Garage. On YouTube, I mean, I was thrilled. Mercedes-Benz flew over to my garage. I was so honored. 2 prototype Gullwings. One of them made of magnesium from 1952 and 53. These are the cars that led to the production of the Gullwing, because they were built as race cars. And the magnesium one is amazing. It is lighter than a Lotus. And the magnesium is so paper thin. I mean, it really is an amazing piece. If you go to Jay Leno's Garage on YouTube, and you can see it this week, it's pretty cool.
Now, these are the cars that Rudy Uhlenhaut was, because he was
right.
He was the top dog back then.
Yeah, he was a great engineer. He had a road-going version of Sterling Moss's SLR, the 8-cylinder, that he would just drive on the street, which is almost impossible. I mean, it's incredibly fast by today's standards. Back in the day, in the 50s, it must have been like, oh my God, this is unbelievable.
Some of the cars. So, you also did an episode with the Aston Martin. And it's now the one that they used in the new movie was this. Tell us the story on that one.
Well, Aston Martin built 25 what everybody calls continuation cars.
Okay.
And they built them in silver birch, like the DB5, which Sean Connery drove, and with all working gadgets, not real machine guns, but but a working smoke screen. A working bulletproof partition that comes up, in the back that block out the bullets, all that stupid stuff. The revolving license plate, all the James Bond gadgets. I think they're something like $4.5 million a piece, but they are brand new DB5s, which is kind of cool.
So, all right, so they've got the continuation DB5, they've got the continuation Cobra, and there's and I understand there's some other cars out there on the market. I think
Well, they're doing blower Bentleys too.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. And their Jaguar crackdown. Jaguar is suing anybody who copies makes continuation Jaguars.
The E-Type?
So no, it's the C-Type and the D-Type.
Oh, the C-Type. Okay.
Yeah. So that's become a whole big thing too. So a lot of replica builders are a little worried about that.
What's your thoughts on resto mods? Now, I'm kind of a purist. I get it. I'm all for period correct modifications, but one concern I have is, let's say, for example, like Dynacorn, they reproduce, the Mustang bodies, the Camaros and stuff like that. And actually, I've looked at the bodies; they look a little better. They kind of they compensated for some of the shortcomings of the earlier cars from a safety standpoint and a few things like that. But down the road, these cars in terms of value, they're not original, but they're totally modified versus taking an original car and modifying, or even take it to the next level, because it seems where they actually have, they're putting electric motors in these cars. What are your thoughts on some of that? If we're going that direction.
Well, it depends what the car is. For example, like Porsches are not rare, but they are valuable. And consequently, a lot of stuff that's not all rare things are valuable. There are cars they didn't make many of because they weren't very good. That doesn't make them more expensive. It's a free country. You can do what you want. To me, the retro mod concept, I had a friend who had a 65 GTO, and it's so funny because what you think was fast back in the day is, oh my God, it's not even. I remember Tim Allen and I, Tim got a 67 GTO with tri-power, automatic, all the performance options. And I went and rented a Nissan Altima 4-door. And we did a drag race. And the Altima blew its doors off. It was just because it's like, when we were kids, I remember picking a road track and read the 66 Hemi Belvedere, 0 to 60 in 6.3 seconds. And I thought that was a misprint. Because back in the 60s, anything under 10 seconds was considered pretty quick. Something at 6.3, that seemed crazy. Now you've got, the Tesla Plaid is 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. So, it's amazing how quickly technology has marched forward,
Wow. So what is some of the most unusual cars that you have kind of had the opportunity to kind of test drive, feature on your show, and you scratched your head?
Or scratch my head, good or bad?
Good.
Well, one car that we built as a shop, which is the car I always loved, was the Mazda Cosmo, which was the first rotary. And that thing is great. It's that smooth, a normal internal car, you get valve float, you can feel things. It starts to slow up as it's hitting the heat, as it passes its torque peak and all that kind of stuff. This just kept pulling and pulling. There are some cars that are just fun to drive. To me, I drove Steve McQueen's XKSS, which was essentially what the XKSSs were. They changed the rule at Le Mans, and Jaguar had all these D-Jags left over that couldn't run anymore because the engine was too big. I think they limited to 3 liter, and those were 3.4 or 3. Anyway, so they decided to make road-going cars out of them. That 1957 XKSS, that was one of the greatest cars I ever drove. Fast like a modern car, small. It's so funny when you talk to kids and they think a light car is anything under 3,000 pounds. This was under 1,500 pounds. Just crazy. And so consequently, every time you subtract weight, you just add horsepower. And this thing was really fast, was fun to drive, made all the right noises. That was an impressive car. These two cars I have this week on J-Lo's garage, the two Mercedes, that magnesium car. Oh my God, for 1952, Jesus, it's fast. And of course the Duesenbergs, I'm a huge Duesenberg fan, and to me, that is the greatest engine of the era. You know, I would read about the Mercedes SSK and all that. That was single overhead cam, and I finally drove one. I go, wow, now this can't hold a candle to Duesenberg. Duesenberg will just blow the doors off this thing, which it does. So I think Duesenberg, that XKSS, one of the cars.
What made the Duesenberg so special? I mean, mechanically.
Well, what made it so special was in unsupercharged form, it made 265 horsepower when a Model T had 22 horsepower. At a time when most cars could barely go a mile a minute, a Duesenberg could go 130 miles an hour. You know, with the superchargers, 320. I mean, all Duesenbergs were built in 1928, all engines. It just took 10 years to sell them because the Depression hit. But it was a 420 or 421 cubic inch, straight eight, twin cam, 4 valves per cylinder. I mean, just an amazing motor. The crankshaft, each end of the crankshaft was filled with within the weights for balancing. You had mercury, so that would slosh around and take out any sort of harmonic or imbalance. I mean, it's an amazing car. It's probably one of the few cars from the late 20s that you can drive on the street and keep up with modern traffic. I mean, I've hit over 100 miles an hour on my Duesenberg a couple of times over this summer, and it's just amazing how fast it is. I mean, it weighs just about 3 tons. Ooh. Because they didn't know the tensile strength of metal, so they just make it as strong as you possibly can. And you had a frame, engine and frame were 4,400 pounds without the body on it. Like, I've got a Duesenberg chassis that I drive just as a chassis. It's just a seat, steering wheel, and the engine and transmission, of course. And it's hilarious how quick it is.
Jeez. Back to that Mercedes now. Okay, so the body is made out of magnesium. How did they actually? Because magnesium generally is brittle, you know, and so
exactly? And you can't weld it, although some people can.
How did they build that car?
How did they what?
How did they build that? I mean, how did they conform everything? Did they actually build molds and build sheets?
Well, I think so. It's hand hammered. I think that's how they did it. You know,
interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's a fascinating piece of kit, this thing. It's you know, and you have the classic instruments and the classic look with sort of modern power. And it wasn't that powerful an engine. It was 180 horsepower, maybe 200 horsepower. But it was so light, and that's what made it win.
It's a straight 8, right? In those cars, the early SLRs?
No, it's a 6.
Oh, it's a 6?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, the Gold Wings were 6 cylinders. Only Sterling had the SLR, had the 8.
And Rudy's SLR.
Right.
So, Jay, let me ask you this. How often do you add to your collection? I know you've got quite an extensive collection with cars and motorcycles. How often do you add to it? Is it just something that kind of floats your fancy? Because a while back, I think there was an article about a little old Falcon, a 63 Falcon Sprint that was on Bring a Trailer, and I think you bought that, didn't you?
That's got to be 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
Maybe more than that. Yeah, you know, it was always one of my favorites. When I worked at the Ford dealership, that was the car that predated the Mustang by about a few months. They thought, would people buy a Mustang? You know, don't forget, Ford had just had a huge fail with the Edsel. So that was, you know, the 50s. And then you figure 3 years to develop a car. So they thought, well, what's going to happen with this Mustang thing, you know? So, yeah, so that was, I forgot your question. What was it? What was it?
What the last car that you bought and Bring a Trailer that I recall?
Was the
Falcon.
Sprint.
So
I remember the Falcon Sprint had the 260 V8 and a 4-speed, and that was about as close to a sports car that, you know, with the exception of the Corvette, of course, that Americans could get. I remember one won the Monte Carlo Rally, and Ford made a big deal out of it. That's when Ford was pushing their big total performance package. You know?
Yeah.
big 427 engine was then, and the camera and all that. And that little thin wall 260, which became the 289 V8, one of those with a set of Webers on it, that was the coolest setup ever.
Wow. So how often do you add to your collection? I mean, is it just whenever something?
There's no rhyme. There's no rhyme or reason. If something catches my eye that I like, ooh, that's kind of cool. Let me get that.
Is there something out there that you've always wanted that's eluding you?
No, I've been pretty lucky that way. The Chrysler Turbine car was the one I looked for a long time, and I finally got one. But sadly, the engine melted down on me. So we're now. Oh, you think parts are hard to get for your whatever it is? Try that.
Well, now wait a minute. You have a 3D printer, so can you like recreate parts for that?
Well, yes, you can, but you're dealing with alloys here of aircraft tolerance and aircraft. The guy who developed the turbine engine for Chrysler, what's his name? Dr. Roy, I think it's Frenchman. And he came up with an alloy that is good enough for automotive use, but not good enough for aeronautical use. Turbine blades are extremely expensive. I've got a Honeywell LT101 turbine engine in a car we built called the EcoJet. And the engine used was $750,000 because the turbine blades are like just crazy. I mean, you're dealing with alloys that work at extreme temperature that have no liquid cooling of any kind. So it's really hard to manufacture. So that's what we're doing now is trying to, we managed to track down a bunch of old guys who worked on the turbine project in the 60s, and they're developing some stuff for us. And it's going to be exciting. We're going to have a brand new turbine engine by the time we're done.
Are you going to do a special feature on Jay Leno's Garage with it?
Oh, yeah, we will.
Well, Jay, we're up against the clock. I want to thank you very much for hanging out with us for Christmas.
Hey, thanks for taking the time.
Dad, I wish you and your wife and everybody a very Merry Christmas. Say hi to Bernard. Merry Christmas, and thank you very much, and a Happy New Year also.
I'll
see you next year.
Soon. Have a great holiday.
Bye-bye. All right, listeners, that was just an amazing show. Again, an interview. Jay's just a super guy, the car guy. I don't know what else to say, but you know what? You can tune in here every Tuesday night between 7 and 8 p.m. on the TAN Talk Radio Network, and you can hear some fascinating and legendary interviews with some fascinating and legendary people in the motorsports world and on occasion music. Now, we got some musical guests lined up here soon, so stick around. They're going to be maybe firing up their Stratocasters. In the meantime, everybody, I want to see you guys at some of the car shows. There's a lot of stuff going on. Enjoy the holiday. Spend a lot of time with your family. And don't forget to check us out here all the time. Follow us on Facebook and check out our website and spread the word. In the meantime, everybody stay safe, drive carefully, love your family, and Merry Christmas.
I found an island in your arms, country in your eyes. Arms are changing, eyes are lying. Bring on through to the other. WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
WZHR, Zephyrhills.
FM 104.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Dell Small Business.
I'm Jennifer Kuiper in Chicago.